Hey everyone. It's a very complicated time out there right now, and it is everyone's responsibility to stay as informed as they possibly can, as at this time, ignorance is not an option.
Never before in history has more information been more readily available. And with the advent of technology, I think people are getting an eye into things that they had never really thought about before. And it is our job to stay on top of these things. Sometimes it may seem overwhelming, but when people are being hurt, you can't look away. You can't pretend it isn't happening.
So do whatever you can to be as involved as possible. Get out there and be active in a safe way, but don't just sit there and observe as that time is past.
It's no longer okay to simply be on the sidelines. You have to pick a side. Black Lives Matter, and police brutality is not something that any country should tolerate.
Do good, be good, help however you can. And now, this week's episode.
Hey everyone, this episode contains spoilers, so if you don't want to end up like Chad driving that BMW at 14, watch the movies first.
What are you doing out in this mess?
1. 2.
You're all doomed.
3. 4.
Hey, where the hell's Corkscrew?
5. 6. 7. 8.
Take your best shot.
9. 10.
Guys! It's okay, he just wanted his machete back!
11.
Place your bets.
12. Friday, the 13th. You may only see it once, but that will be enough.
Twinema.
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 Twinema. Cinema. Twinema.
Cinema. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Twinema Cinema. As always, I am Max, and my lovely twin brother over here.
Joey coming at you live from Los Angeles.
Yes, indeed, and we have a special treat for you today with a special episode of Twinema Cinema, in which we don't actually talk about a dueling movie pairing. We're kind of going off the beaten path for this one.
That is correct, listeners. Today, we are taking on the Friday the 13th film franchise.
Having an abundance of spare time in the last couple of weeks, months, years, however long it's been since March. We went through the entirety of the Jason Voorhees saga, and we're gonna have a little talking about.
We've got some information for you, such as which films made the most money and the least money. We also did a list, each of us. Each of us have dramatically different tastes in these Jason films, it seems, but we did come to a consensus, and that'll be the list we are presenting to you today.
And it's always good with these particular episodes, I think we're going to find, to talk about the origins. So, Joey, in our household growing up, I'm pretty sure that these weren't the types of movies that Mom let us watch. I know I personally had to sneak out and watch them at a friend's house to learn the exploits of serial killer Jason Voorhees. How'd you come into the Friday the 13th series?
For me, this was actually a much later development. My first foray into horror films was at a friend's house, just like you, seeing Scream. That's the one that got me hooked. And then after approximately 3 weeks of not being able to sleep, I got over it and suddenly fell in love with horror films. But Friday the 13th didn't come till much later. I'm trying to remember when I saw the first one. I don't think it was until college because I had a superiority complex believing that Halloween was the superior franchise.
Well, I would probably agree that Halloween, the film, is a superior film, but as a franchise, I don't know. Because, yeah, Jason movies turned into something special over time. They just became silly, but boy, were they fun to watch for the gore aficionado.
I can't get over my love for Halloween, but I have to say I have found a great appreciation for the Jason films, for this franchise, because they definitely take themselves a little less seriously later down the line, which brings about a whole hell of a lot of fun. It's more like I can just turn my brain off because a lot of these films are pretty bad.
Yeah, and you probably wouldn't be thrown off by the trick question in Scream, where they try to ask you where they try to ask you who the serial killer in the original Friday the 13th was. Since you saw that first, right? You know for sure who the serial killer is in the first Friday the 13th?
Oh, I know now, but man, when that movie scene happened, they got me. They got me good.
It's like, wait, no, what?
Every that's the thing. I think pretty much everybody who grew up post these movies or wasn't a fan of these movies, because it's just a part of the pop culture lexicon at this point, you would assume that Jason's the killer in the first film. But, it happens to be his wonderful mother, Pamela.
Yeah, she is the killer in the first one, so Jason gets no kills in that first installment, but he steadily makes up for his laziness in subsequent installments.
Well, there's child labor laws, man. He can't be killing everybody.
Yeah, give him a break, man. Wait, if there was child labor laws involved, that means there would definitely be a series of twins working on set to rotate. So, are you saying that there was another Voorhees boy?
You know what? Seeing the amount of carnage that he has created, it seems not unreasonable.
I know, especially how he just kind of vanishes in and out of places at Camp Crystal Lake all the time without, going beyond a mosey, if you will, as far as speed is concerned.
God, this would actually be a pretty great little premise. I think it'd upset a hell of a lot of people, but just the idea of Jason actually having drowned in the lake, and then Jason's twin brother who watched it happen, or, even worse, his twin brother who did it, who killed him.
But which twin died?
Exactly. Man, this spitballing is turning into something that I'm a little too excited about. But let's get back to the series at hand.
We can't talk about it too much. The internet will rip us off.
Yeah, we don't want to give anything away, especially if we're going to be out there writing the successful screenplays soon.
But yeah, my appreciation for the series developed throughout high school, and it just kept going. Mostly because it was just like a cool rebel thing to do to watch these scary movies growing up. It's like I had to get out of the house. We watched them. We rented them. I have a feeling that my friends' parents were narking on me the entire time, but I got away with it in the end because I kept watching them. And then I saw the glory that was most of these edited for cable later on Spike or something like that.
Yeah, they had a long run on AMC. I know that. They never really played the originals, but like parts 6 through 9 were definitely all over AMC when I was growing up.
And then, yeah, most of these were all Hollywood Video or Blockbuster rentals, I believe was the case for most of these, and the subject of many a sleepover.
Do you remember at Take-Two Video that they, well, first off, rest in peace, Take-Two Video. I went there so often, and you are one of the reasons why I love movies the way that I do. But at Take-Two Video, they specifically had a Jason prop that was one of a head of Jason in a glass case. And I couldn't ever not look at that. Like, it was years before I'd actually watched the movie, but that prop is cemented in my brain as like a part of cinema.
Do you remember which installment it was from?
No, I couldn't tell you that. I actually later on ended up meeting the owner's son. So like, I bet I could slowly try and figure out, but that would require a lot of digging. And I don't know if that's worth it at this point.
But it doesn't take much to dig into these movies because frankly, there isn't a whole lot to them. And the simplicity is kind of what makes them endearing.
I agree. They're very straightforward in, well, it's actually, they take a weird meandering road to be so straightforward. They just kind of start creating and adding canon as they go because it was never a thing that was envisioned from the outset. The first film was supposed to be a standalone film, and they were supposed to do an anthology-style series where something would center around Friday the 13th, but it would be a different type of movie. It wouldn't have to do with the Voorhees family. But after the success of the first one being extensive, massively successful for its budget, they just couldn't turn away from it.
And yeah, you can't really blame them at that point. Although I will say eventually the TV series for Friday the 13th was more of the anthology type thing, going from, not Adventures of the Voorhees family. But yeah, when you have such a minuscule budget as less than $1 million for the original installment, making just south of $60 million in 1980, you gotta keep making more.
Exactly. And you know what? I didn't think about this before. How crazy is that origin story, considering that this movie is obviously a direct ripoff of Halloween?
So much so that the producers have admitted this, but they kind of bask in that rip-offness as they made their own thing, and it was a huge success afterwards.
Well, what I mean more specifically is the fact that it was planned to be an anthology series, and then in Halloween 3, they literally tried to make Halloween an anthology series. Like, that's just such a random connection.
And things criss and cross in Hollywood as far as those are concerned. But obviously, I think it was kind of smart that Jason stayed out of the anthology game, as ultimately it failed for Halloween 3.
Yeah, I mean, the fourth one, they had to come back hard because they're like, all right, we made a big mistake here, everybody. And Jason never quite got away from their roots.
He kept on trucking as far as his journey is concerned, although his doesn't quite take as much plot as the Halloween movies do.
So I think we're getting a little bit too into our mindset here of going after dueling films and talking about other franchises. So let's focus more specifically on Friday the 13th here. Do you want to start with the first film, or how do you want to do this?
You know what? Let's just dive right into our rankings. I feel like if we rattle those off, we can go into the little minutiae of each movie if we want.
Oh, that sounds good to me. So what we're doing here is we have a combined ranking list. We each ranked our films from best to worst, and then created an average to see which films we have 1 through 12.
So instead of just reading 1 through 12 of our ranking system here, we're actually going to go from the end to the front, just because it's more fun that way. Although it actually doesn't start at 12, it starts at 10, as we had a 3-way tie for the lowest ranking of our lists.
I was expecting us to have similar lists in some regard, and I think what ended up happening is the top of our list and the bottom of our list are very similar. It's the middle where we got a lot of leeway. I honestly wasn't expecting there to be a tie for worst film, so the fact that it's a 3-way tie really surprised me.
With those, it's kind of the middle installments as well, so it was kind of a weird little thing. We gotta have Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, and Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan at the very bottom.
So instead of wasting too much time going through these films separately, let's just hit them all kind of together here. So of those 3, Max, which one did you hate the most?
I hated Part 5, A New Beginning, the most, mostly for the most basic of Jason reasons. There's no Jason.
Right, which is one of the big reasons why it's so low for me, although of those 3, it is my favorite. And a big reason for that for me is because it's so close to being a really good installment of the franchise. I think, obviously, not having Jason in there hurts it dramatically, but if they would have just, instead of gone with having the freaking ambulance driver, the paramedic, as the killer, and actually leaned into it being Tommy Jarvis being the killer instead of doing that switch, I think you really got something there. But instead, they were like, we're going to trick people. And you know what? Tricking people for the sake of tricking people isn't always a good decision.
Although I wouldn't call it tricking. They actually wanted to go back to the basics of the original movie, as that was a mystery as well. So no one had an idea who the killer was, but that was kind of the undoing of this installment, is everyone expected it to be Jason, only for it not to be, which is kind of just a gut punch as far as fans of this franchise are concerned.
Yeah, especially when you're that deep into it, because this is it was the 5th film, right?
Yeah.
So after that, where you've committed to Jason being the killer for the whole franchise, it's hard to switch. And I think the only transition they could have made successfully is the one that I just suggested, and they decided to not go with that. They instead decided to create a character out of thin air and have him be the killer. It's so dumb, but like so close to being a good decision because it would have made it different enough to work. But the paramedic is just like it ruins the whole movie.
As far as the lowest ranked in this particular grouping was New Blood for you, right?
Yes, it was. And I believe why that ended up happening is because I don't remember it very well. And it's weird that I don't remember it very well, considering there's telekinesis involved, which is the superpower I have always wanted to have. So the fact that it just fell so short, I think it goes to show that there's just not a whole lot going on in this movie. They were really grasping at straws. You don't really relate to any of the characters. The psychiatrist character, I mean, psychiatrists are incredibly important. They really help out a lot of people, and they make him such a douche. Like, I hate him more I think he is the most hated character for me in the entire franchise.
And they don't kill him nearly fast enough.
Yeah, he lives so long. I think he might be the last kill. I don't remember for sure, but he's close to.
Yeah, like right before I think they get to the dock at the very end where Tina's dad reappears. Weirdly, looking very much alive after spending, a decade or so underwater. I think, the doctor was probably the closest to last kill.
Man, and he even pushes her mom in front of Jason. Like, he's just such a bastard.
Like, you want to see him die earlier than he did. But it just feels like a wasted premise. If you're going to have a so-called Carrie versus Jason movie, you got to make it a little more dynamic than what they offered.
I mean, if you're telekinetic and you can crash a building on top of Jason, you can rip his arm off. Come on, do something cool.
And they did have a few little cool moments, but it wasn't, as advertised.
I think the one scene that's actually pretty good in the movie is when she's dealing with him inside of the cabin next to theirs. That's pretty good, but really overall, it's garbage. These are the worst films in this franchise.
And then moving on to that, kind of grouped pretty closely together for us is Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, or as I call it, Jason rides a boat for a little bit and ends up in Vancouver.
I think it's a brilliant idea in terms of keeping the budget down and changing the location, but they just don't do anything with it. All the characters are boring. I don't remember any of the kills. The only kill that I remember is I think when Jason quote unquote dies at the end of the movie. That's the only thing that I remember. They're on a boat and they keep going, and I don't think anyone really ever dies on screen.
I don't know. The biggest kill on the boat for me is pretty much the guy in the sauna who gets a rock through the gut. And that was a reshoot, and they never even showed his face.
See, I don't remember that at all. But what you're saying, I think I remember that they don't show his face. It's memorable that they shot it in such a way like that. It's not memorable in and of itself.
And then, they famously shot in Vancouver with only a night's filming or so in actual Times Square. The rest of the time when they're actually in Canada, it's painfully obvious because most of the extras shouting at Jason or whatever, you can just tell they're Canadian. It's takes you out of it the entire time.
I don't remember that quite specifically, but I do not have a good ear for accents, so it doesn't surprise me.
Considering where we grew up, it probably should be.
I think I'm just accent deaf for the most part, it's what can I do?
Although to be fair, Fargo is much maligned for its accent that actually doesn't exist. That's more, a northern Minnesota accent, don't you know?
We don't have it. I'm sure we have it on some words, but what can you do? Jason Takes Manhattan, terrible.
Yeah. Although moving on to something that isn't a tie, thankfully, is Friday the 13th Part 3 at number 9 on that list. I had it a little higher. You had it at the very bottom.
Yeah, for me, it's the worst film in the franchise. The problem with it is that it comes after two of the best films in the franchise and then just nosedives right off a cliff. I just don't like it. No, it's also really strange too because it creates one of the most memorable and iconic parts of the entire franchise. I think that's its only shining asset is the simple fact that this film is where they introduced the hockey mask.
Do you think big part of its failure is due to the fact that they tried to nudge in all those, gimmicky 3D effects, or is there more to it?
I mean, that didn't help. That's for sure. For me, it just feels really hokey. It doesn't feel like there's any real tension going on. And also, I can't remember the character's name right now, but he's the guy who has the hockey mask. It's maybe the most annoying character in the whole franchise. He is awful. He just does not know how to associate himself with anybody in the movie. People don't even seem to be friends with him. He's very much like he's very much an outsider character a la Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You know, he's just this character that's there, but nobody seems to like him.
Poor Shelley always gets the short shrift on there. The movie is telling you should like this guy, but in no way do they ever try endearing him to the audience. He's just a guy that you want to die.
So, I mean, in that regard, it does kind of work, but it grated me so badly just hearing him talk and seeing him interact with people. It was a slog getting through that movie for me.
And then, yeah, that's pretty much the only memorable part is him. Well, I guess, yeah, they never even gave him a definitive death. It's just assumed because Jason took the mask that he was dead.
Even though I am a big fan of modern 3D and even some of these classic 3D films, like Jaws 3D, for example, is a guilty pleasure of mine, the movie just really doesn't work for me.
Sorry for that brief interruption. I had to take what the fantastic podcast In Voorhees We Trust with Matt Gorley and Paul Rust call a Jason Voorhees.
That's ridiculous.
But yeah, fantastic podcast about the Jason films, if you ever want to watch that. But getting out of the miserable part 3, we're going to something a little more upbeat as far as rhythm is concerned. It's the Friday the 13th remake from 2009, the last and 12th Friday the 13th film.
For me, this is the only one that I've actually seen in a theater. Unfortunately, I haven't been lucky enough to see any of the other films when they were coming out or in any kind of like revival. But I hope to do that at some point because I think that would be an absolute blast.
Yeah, I think we were actually in the same screening, just not next to each other, watching it that first night. And it had an energy that was great for Jason movies, especially after like the 2004 Dawn of the Dead where you have running zombies. Now you have a running Jason. So it's a whole different energy.
I, at the time, thought it was a really good idea, and it definitely changed things a lot, having Jason move around, be more athletic, be less supernatural in a lot of ways. But after having reviewed the whole franchise, that's one of the reasons why this is lower. It kind of takes itself a little too seriously in its use of Jason, which is unfortunate because the characters in the movie are so ridiculous that it feels like it would have been balanced better with Jason being a little more over the top.
It's true. They try to make you feel Jason like they do in a couple other entries on this list. But yeah, ultimately it doesn't do as much as it should for a remake. Although I respect the hell out of it for even just compressing the first 4 movies into the opening 20 minutes of the movie that results in a fake out. So it's almost a Psycho-esque fake out that kind of makes it really interesting structure-wise.
Yeah, they did do a pretty good job of just summarizing the films very quickly and getting us to the character that we know and love of Jason Voorhees. It works, but then it also in some ways becomes 2 movies. We've got a really great short film at the beginning and then a long drawn out conclusion to that short film.
Right. And then it is nice to see just a different type of Jason. Yeah, what I call Mole Man Jason, as he has taken the 30 years or so that he's been operating and dug a series of tunnels under the camp.
Yeah, and I don't remember seeing like a single shovel. So like, was he doing it with the machete, with his hands, like a mole? Was he actually Mole Man Jason? God, that's just a disgusting looking creature. Just think of it like a star-nosed mole? Is that what they're called?
Yeah, what do you think is under the mask?
Oh, rough.
It also has just some hateable characters at certain points, which you just want to have them die as fast as possible. And of course they don't, but that kind of, works for the movie too.
Other than the psychiatrist, revisiting this movie, like, I can't remember the character name, but I can't remember any of the character names really outside of like Jason, Pamela, and Tommy. The boyfriend guy, well, he's not even necessarily a boyfriend, whatever, the guy who owns the cabin, he is a top tier douche. I think he is maybe the douchiest character in the whole franchise. And they waited till the remake to bring him in.
I know, and he survived for most of the film, only to get mounted on a tow truck at the very end, which was very satisfying, but it took too long. I wanted to see him gone sooner than that, but these movies are not about what you want, they're about what you get.
Yeah, and I honestly was surprised that they didn't, like, I thought that they might let him survive. It was one of those things where I'm like, oh my God, is he gonna be the guy who gets away with this? Because I kind of like the guts on that, but I hate everything about it.
And so more interesting, because the second reboot from this director is he also directed the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 2003.
Nice. I haven't revisited that one in quite a while, but I remember not hating it.
Yeah, I didn't hate it either. It was quite satisfying and very grimy, which I appreciated.
So after this remake, which I think was actually the second one that I personally ever saw, because I had seen the original and then I saw the remake, then later exploring the rest of the franchise. But that's what it was I watched the first one and then I watched the remake.
But moving on from the remake, we have something that is even more crazy, which is Jason Goes to Hell, the Final Friday. What it turns out is the first movie under new management with New Line, as Paramount had sold the Jason character to New Line in the early 90s. This is a weird-ass movie where Jason is not actually Jason for the majority of it, but he's actually just his own, soul inhabiting other people as we go on.
And it's the first movie in the franchise that doesn't have Friday the 13th in the title. And that's because when it was sold to New Line, they just sold the character. They didn't sell the franchise or the franchise title. And as a matter of fact, they didn't sell any of the other characters either. So in this film and in the subsequent films, they can't even use someone like Tommy Jarvis. So they just have to roll with it, which makes this movie crazy. And it also has the biggest disparity on our list between the films that Max liked and the films that I liked. For me, I have this at number 4 out of the 12 Jason films because it is just so nuts. Obviously, it's sad that Jason's not in 99% of the movie, but it kind of works. It's just ridiculous. Like, I think the addition of adding like the Necronomicon in there and having a little bit of a tie-in with Evil Dead and having the friggin' dagger, it's so off the wall and ridiculous.
You're right. It is absolutely nuts, which is why I liked it. And it's only lower on my particular list because I enjoy the other movies just a little bit more. But it is an absolutely crazy movie with Jason body swapping, and it is gross half the time. And watching interviews with the director on the documentary Crystal Lake Memories, it's nuts because he actually wanted to be the director that did different things. So when you have the guy that has Jason's soul in him, strapping down this one dude, ritualistically shaving off his mustache, and then making out with him to implant his soul in the other guy, he adds a level of homoeroticism, which is just admirable, honestly, considering the amount of TNA you usually get in this movie.
A disembodied Jason crawls into a woman's vagina.
Yes,
that happens in this movie.
Yeah, there's a Jason worm that is a big factor in how he repossesses people.
It goes so off the rails and is so crazy that I remember it incredibly well. And then it also does have a pretty iconic little ending, I gotta say.
It does, because, he, like, true to the title, he actually is reclaimed by hell, which is, pretty nice, as it actually sets up the next film on this list. But until we mention that, it's kind of nuts because it also goes out of its way to reference every single staple of horror cinema from the 80s.
And it does a pretty good job of it. Obviously, some of it's schlocky. It's a Friday the 13th film, so it's not hitting on all cylinders all the time. But they do a good job of referencing all of these things, and it's a lot of fun. And this film was actually, since it was licensed to New Line Cinema, it was originally intended to be a crossover film with Freddy Krueger of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise and Jason from the Friday the 13th franchise, and that just didn't end up working out, so they had to go with this absolutely bonkers idea that they came up with kind of at the last minute to create this movie. And they do a nod to that at the end of the film, where we see that Jason's mask is sitting above his grave, and you see Freddy Krueger's claws come out of the ground and actually take the mask down to hell as well.
There's even more obscure references too, because you have the Necronomicon you mentioned, so there's Evil Dead references, there's John Carpenter's The Thing references at multiple times. They talk about the Myers house being in the same town. So Halloween franchise is literally referenced within this movie.
Wait. They referenced that? I don't remember that. So yeah, Haddonfield is a place in this movie?
They don't reference Haddonfield. They reference the Myers house.
Ah, okay, gotcha. I was just like, that doesn't quite check out. But yeah, what you're saying makes a little more sense.
Which is even more nuts because they reference the other movie they blatantly ripped off by saying, oh, there's now a Voorhees house that was never referenced in this canon before.
And
it's nuts.
It is ridiculous and it's fun. It's also really graphic and gross. So it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that we're going to be the outliers by saying this is actually pretty high on our list compared to where it should be and a lot of, more true fans.
Hey, they don't get to take credit, man. Here's the thing. We watched all of the movies and had a great time. I believe we're fans. We've been fans of the franchise for years at this point. You since high school, me since college. So whatever they say, they have to deal with us. This is our opinion, and so just deal with it, people.
Moving into the middle of the list, tied at number 5, are what I arguably would call the most fun movies on this list, as we have Jason X and Freddy vs. Jason right in the smack damn middle.
Yes, these ones are definitely a little more fun, and they lean way more into the camp and just kind of the absurdity of things. Jason X and Freddy vs. Jason are just like Jason Goes to Hell in their insanity, but they have way more comedy. Jason Goes to Hell takes itself a little too seriously, which I think is why it's further down a lot of people's lists, whereas Jason X and Freddy vs. Jason, like Max said, are a lot of fun. They know what they are. They are absurd. Hell, Jason X takes place in space.
And that's usually the death knell of every horror franchise. Leprechaun probably never recovered from that shit, but Jason owns it.
Yeah, it's actually pretty crazy because Jason X made more money than some of the other films in the franchise, which is just something you're not expecting when something goes that off the wall. But it does do some fun throwbacks to the other films, and I think just they had nowhere else to go. They're like the Fast and the Furious franchise at that point. So they were like, all right, let's just freeze him in some kind of carbonite, like Star Wars, and just set it 1,000 years in the future or whatever.
As you do. And you got Freddy vs. Jason, which is fulfilling the promise of the very end of Jason Goes to Hell 10 years later, because there's a million different stops and starts with that, fateful meeting between the two horror titans. But it absolutely catches in on the promise, although it probably ends up being a little more of a Freddy movie than a Jason movie, but Jason wins in the end, so it kind of evens out.
Yeah, I mean, without Freddy, the premise of Freddy vs. Jason just doesn't work. And I think the premise of Freddy vs. Jason is amazing. It is such a good idea that Freddy needs Jason to create nightmares in the real world so that Freddy can inhabit children's nightmares again. It's brilliant. It's just not quite executed as well as I would have liked. And that's why it's lower on the list for me. It is fun. It's a good time, but it's not reaching the level of quality as the other films that are higher on this list. It's fun. It's enjoyable. But for me, it's more of I'll throw it on in the background kind of thing. I'm not going to sit down and watch it unless it's with a group of people and we're just having a good time.
Which is kind of crazy because it actually almost sports the highest body count Jason racks up in one single film, although it seems like the Final Friday lets him have a little bit more fun, and Jason X actually lets him take out an entire space station, but I don't know if that counts as, a personal kill. But
yeah, I wouldn't quite count taking out a space station, but what are you gonna do, man? He earned it.
Yeah, he earned it. But yeah, Freddy vs. Jason, as he's doing what Jason does, Freddy gets mad at him, but in the cornfield rave scene, he just takes out 10 people like it's nothing, which is always kind of crazy when it comes to a Jason movie because you never see him kill that, fast.
That's probably the best Jason sequence in the whole movie, and one of the more memorable sequences in Freddy vs. Jason is that one. So it's an installment in this franchise and in another franchise, but it does stand out in the Friday the 13th series as just being a lot of fun.
And yeah, ultimately those are pretty much important because they are fun. But as we get closer to number one, we have another one, which a little bit of disparity between them, which is Friday the 13th Part 4, The Final Chapter.
Which, this one, for a lot of Friday the 13th fans, it's one of their favorite, and understandably so. It is a good movie. For me, it's not quite as high. I had this at 6, and you had this at 2.
I had this at 2 because it pretty much contains quintessential Jason traits, which I appreciated the hell of. It also had Corey Feldman as, young Tommy Jarvis, which is a great little addition to the canon.
Yes, I think him and his sister are probably the best part of this film. And I think that's kind of my big problem, is that their story is so much more interesting than the story of the people next door. It's just, they're just getting murdered. And then Tommy and his sister, they're the real protagonists of this story, but they don't have quite enough screen time, although they are the most interesting characters. I think that's really what hurts it. Yes, they needed the body count to be a little higher because it's a Jason film and people gotta die. So that's basically why the other group of people exists, why that party house exists. But that alone doesn't make it worth it for me. That's why it's a little lower on my list.
Whereas it's very high on my list, mostly because it isn't through brute force or some psychic power that they take down Jason. It's through psychology, which is a crazy element as far as this franchise is concerned. Tommy Jarvis shaves his head and makes himself look like a young Jason Voorhees to kind of trick, horrible villain Jason in this case, to let his guard down. So Tommy Jarvis can take his own machete and chop him in the head.
Which, it's probably the best ending of all of the films, barring the original. It is just such a great concept and such a great idea, and it's executed so well because Corey Feldman at this point is kind of like at the height of his powers, and he's a great child actor. Like, I haven't seen any of his films as an adult, but as a kid, he's just straight crushing it. He, even when he has the connection with the stranger and he's showing him the masks that he makes, it's just like, man, Corey Feldman in the 80s, you could do no wrong.
Yeah, the triple threat right there. You had Gremlins, this movie, and then the Goonies back to back. In fact, the Goonies is what prevented him from coming back for Part 5. He filmed a little cameo in his own backyard for that movie, but that was all that he was allowed to do before, Goonies claimed him.
Which is unfortunate that he's even in that film because he's the best part of that movie.
And then it goes downhill very quickly.
And so moving on from the final chapter, which much like many of these titles didn't accurately portray its final fate, we're moving up to number 3 on our list, which is the original Friday the 13th.
And it's notoriously known, as we mentioned with the Scream part earlier, as not having Jason Voorhees as the killer, as it is his mom, who still thinks that her little baby boy is dead, drowned because the counselors were not looking. And I always appreciate this movie as it's kind of portrayed as a mystery, as you don't actually know who's doing the killing up until the very end. Although rewatching it, you can actually tell there's little clues as you go along, which is kind of cool.
It's got some incredible rewatch factor, and a large portion of that is just due to its history. Like, it's iconic at this point. It may not be the best acted, and it certainly doesn't have the best cinematography, but it's got its charms. Just being at the camp, being part of the origin, being at Crystal Lake, seeing this happen, and just bringing you into the mythos and the canon of this whole franchise, it's something that I could always revisit because of that.
It also has my favorite element, which is Doomsayer Ralph, who pretty much just pops up to tell the campers that they're doomed.
Man, man, when he pops out of the friggin' pantry, it's such a great scare, but it's also so dumb. Why would he ever be there? Like, if he came out of the pantry with any food, like if he was there just taking food and then also told them about Doom, then maybe it works a little better for me. But nope, he's just hiding in the pantry, about to tell them of their demise. He's a great character in a history of iconic Doomsayer characters. He's definitely up there, but he's also just so ridiculous.
Like, apologies, I was stealing some beans, but also you're doomed!
Right? That would work a little bit better for me if he had a purpose of being there outside of that, or at least like a fake purpose. Like if he was just pretending to steal something, works a little better, but like it's still a good scare. Also, you can't forget about the fact that Kevin Bacon is in this movie.
I know this is like his second major role after Animal House, and he was still on the rise. But yeah, just enough time to get in a quick low-budget horror movie before he gets big.
It's so crazy when you think about it that he's in two like iconic films back to back. It's just sometimes you get cast in the right things and you have no idea. Obviously, you'd think Animal House is going to be a bigger success due to the track record of the talents involved, but also you get lucky sometimes and you get cast in something that spawns, 11 sequels.
Yeah, last time I checked, how many Animal House sequels were there?
I mean, if you include all of the National Lampoon's films, quite a few.
Okay, fine. Moving on to number 2, we have kind of a small disparity. We have Joey's number 1 in Friday the 13th Part 2, whereas I had this at number 3.
Man, I really enjoyed the hell out of this movie. It caught me off guard because we were watching them in order this last time, and the disparity between the original Friday the 13th and Part 2 is extensive. Like, the budget goes up twofold, 2.5-fold actually, from $550,000 to $1,250,000, which, we're still not talking insane numbers, but the jump from 1 to 2 is pretty crazy, and you could see it in the cinematography. It looks so much better that it's a little crazy. And the other thing that's pretty cool about 2 is a lot of it takes place during the day. They shot a lot more of it during the day than the previous film, and that was an unexpected thing out of Friday the 13th Part 2. So many horror films take place at night because it's scary. Friday the 13th Part 2 does, but it definitely keeps you on your toes.
They probably realized they didn't have to light it if it was during the day, so they probably saved some money there. Although most of what this movie annoyed me was pretty much the first 15 minutes, which is an entire recap of the first movie, which is just kind of lazy.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's kind of what tore me up about this, right? Is a problematic thing, but I guess you stretch your budget that way. So the rest of the film, they're able to use more of that money.
And boy, did they. Some of the kills are fantastic in this movie.
Obviously, for me, and I think for you as well, Max, the most iconic one, getting a machete to the face and then falling down a flight of stairs.
Or rolling down a flight of stairs, because
Correct.
They killed a guy in a wheelchair, which is very rare outside of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So killing a disabled guy is actually a pretty gutsy move.
Well, simply the fact that both Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Friday the 13th had characters in wheelchairs, I think is something that I think is probably overlooked, but that's some inclusivity that you don't see in a lot of other films. So the fact that they put that into this one and then created the most iconic moment perhaps the most iconic moment of this movie. I think the ending could be argued to be up there, whereas a demasked Jason comes through the window and grabs them. But that's the other problem with this movie. Like, for how much I like this movie, there are some problems. One of them being, as Max mentioned, the recap at the beginning. And the biggest issue for me personally is the ending. It is confusing, needlessly confusing. I still don't know what happened at the end of the movie. Did it work? Did it scare me? Did it look cool? Yes. Do I know what happened? No, I have no actual idea of what happened at the end of this movie.
And I think a lot of people would agree with you there, they don't do a really concrete job of telling you what happened, who lived, who died, and so on.
And for me, I think another reason why this movie is so good is because of its homage to Psycho. The fact that Jason is basically under the impression that his mom is alive and is keeping her body there. is just such a good story element, and it carries throughout the rest of the franchise. I mean, this is the first film where Jason is the actual killer, and it works so well. Obviously, we don't have the iconic mask yet, but the burlap sack over his head works pretty well in terms of hiding his face. Although it's not nearly as cool looking as the future installments, it really works for me. And the climactic scene where, once again, we have some psychological elements that help us defeat Jason, where she's pretending to be his mother. It's some of the best stuff in the franchise, originated and actually occurs in this movie.
And moving on to number 1, we both were pretty much in agreement on this one. We only differed by one choice. It was number 2 for you, number 1 for me, and that was Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. This movie got it. This is exactly what I would want to see in a Jason movie.
This is the first film that takes it out of the realm of horror and brings it also into the realm of comedy. It's the one that is the beginning of what you think of when it comes to Jason films. After this film, they really can't go back. And I think that is a testament to why this one is so good.
I mean, yeah, it's the first one where you actually portray Jason as supernatural, as they raise him Frankenstein style from being struck by lightning. He comes back from the dead. There's no way he's a normal human now. He's just killing because he can.
And it's so good. That scene's amazing because Tommy Jarvis, a retcon from the fifth film, a retcon that changed a couple times between 4, 5, and 6. Tommy Jarvis believes that Jason is not totally dead and decides that he needs to go unbury him and finish the job that he tried to accomplish in 4. And in so doing, unintentionally brings him into the supernatural realm and brings him fully back to life. And then, because of Tommy's connection to Jason in the past, ends up being labeled as the murderer throughout most of this film.
Yeah, he's falsely arrested by the sheriff, put in jail, where he's then hits on and gets the hots for, who responds with equal hots by the sheriff's daughter, and they have to themselves band together to take down Jason.
It's a fun ride the whole way through. It starts out at such a crazy situation, and it just keeps going. And I think one of the things that's so good about it, too, is besides the fun, besides the enjoyment, the cinematography in this film is also quite good. I like it. It's personally, I think, my favorite looking of all of the films. But the conclusion itself is so quality. It's a great way to end a movie.
Yeah, I mean, it gets a little bit of poetic justice as Tommy Jarvis actually gets Jason into the water and drowns him again.
It's such a good bookend closure moment to have him chained by the neck to the bottom of a lake. That is such a cool image. Well done, everyone. That's such a good turn in the movie.
It also supports just some of the funniest moments, too. Like the very beginning of the movie, you have this corporate retreat with some just random, we'll just call them bodies because they're destined to die. But they're playing paintball in the woods, and they happen upon Jason trying to shoot him with paint. And he just kills them mercilessly. It's hilarious.
Because it's so aware of what it is able to transcend some of the flaws of the previous films in the franchise. It knows what it needs to be, and it gets you all of those elements, while then also bringing in some other things. It's not retreading all of the same territory. It's actually building some new territory.
While it does have some of the best kills in the franchise, what would you say are like the top 3 kills throughout the entire series? Like, I feel like, folding the sheriff in half is a pretty good one in number 6, but not quite my top kill.
For me, probably my favorite kill is in Jason X. I call it Jason 10, and it bothers the shit out of Max. But Jason X is when they put Jason in a simulation of Camp Crystal Lake. In that simulation, he ends up killing 2 campgoers by slamming them against a tree in sleeping bags, which is a callback to 7, where he does the same thing with a single camper. It's such an amazing moment in that scene because the characters who set up the simulation don't know what's about to happen, but we do. And then also the sound effect that is on, because the campers don't die because they're in a simulation. So when they're getting hit against the tree, it just cracks me up.
Because it's like, ow, ow. They're just laughing as they're getting killed in the simulation. Although I'd say the best kill from Jason X, and probably one of the best in the franchise, is early in Jason X, when this girl is frozen in liquid nitrogen and her face is shattered on a desktop, which is just brutal.
The absurdity of Jason X makes some of the kills and some of the moments really hard to top. But besides that one, for me, I got to go with the staircase in part 2. And then personally, getting an arrow through your neck in the first film is just, I'll never forget that. That moment is such a good and unexpected moment. Well done, team. Thank you, Tom Savini.
Yeah, they do fantastic work throughout the franchise. Although just sometimes when a character is helpless, you can't help but feel for them and respect the kill, so to speak. Like part 5, hate the movie, but there's this one guy who gets cornered in an outhouse and is just trying to dodge a pole that's being jabbed through the thing and ends up just getting skewered.
That is the best part of that movie, which is one of the main reasons why it is not my least favorite. It's just such a good sequence. And it made me so happy. But it also is super awkward because like he's singing to his girlfriend, like she's outside the outhouse and he's inside the outhouse and they're singing to each other. It's like, who the hell are these people?
It's a solid couple as they're, connecting while shitting. Although, oh God, I can't get over Freddy vs. Jason. One of the first kills is guy is stabbed in bed after sex and then folded up in bed, which is just,
It is a brutal moment. And you have a very visceral reaction to it because they do a really cool effect with that. And it's just, you can't look away. And it's just like, it just hits you so hard because they're not even trying to hide it in any capacity. It's just directly in front of you and you have to deal with this moment.
Although, like, I don't know if it's the best, but the one is just the funniest, or I don't know what the word is, but I like it a lot, is when Crispin Glover in part 4 is asking, where's the corkscrew? And suddenly Jason just stabs the corkscrew into his hand before, locking a butcher's knife in his face. But it's like Jason having fun or being ironic for the first time.
It's one of those moments that is great, but also just feels weird in that film because it's so jokey. Like if that moment happened in 6 or any of the later films, I would probably have laughed out loud. But in that moment, I'm just like, I guess this is what we're doing now. And it works, but it's just it's so corny. And so that's why it's great and also painful in some ways at the same time.
Although not nearly as painful as the best kill in Jason Goes to Manhattan, which simply when a character named Julius tries boxing Jason stupidly and then gets his head literally knocked off. One punch, Jason just punches his head straight off into a dumpster.
Yeah, I forgot about that guy boxing him. I mean, that dude's in pretty good shape, but we are fighting Jason here. Like, it's like punching a brick wall. You're going to get some jabs in there, but what if the wall hits back?
And the wall does hit back. Although, fun bringing up Jason Manhattan again, as it is actually record lowest grossing in the series.
Yeah, it clocked in at a grand total of $14.34 million, which is significantly lower than where the franchise started off at, which was in 1980 with Friday the 13th and $59,754,000. And we actually tabulated this up a little bit, and with inflation, the original Friday the 13th is the highest grossing film in the franchise. Without inflation, it is 2003's Freddy vs. Jason at $114 million.
And then a respectable total. The remake got $92 million in 2009 off a $17 million budget. Not too shabby, although it's kind of crazy. The latter two in the series, Freddy vs. Jason and the remake, both having $17 million, $25 million budgets, where it was just $500,000 to make Friday the 13th, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's also crazy when you think about the fact that even Jason Goes to Hell, that movie only had a $3 million budget. So like in the early 90s, we're still talking, low millions. And then all of a sudden we jump up to double digits. And what's funny about it is it increases their overall box office, but it didn't really do a whole lot for their quality, and their margin doesn't seem that much better.
Yeah, so pretty much they say that mother is a necessity of invention, and that usually helps out a lot of lower budgeted movies. And pretty much prior to Part 8, all the movies were $5 million and below, and they grossed at least 3 times that. So that kind of helps them out. So pretty much, yeah, give Jason money, and he will not help you.
I'd love to see somebody trying to pay him off. Just, here, take my wallet, sir.
I think the guy, the teacher, professor dude in Jason X tries doing that. He tries paying him off, and then he just takes the machete instead and beheads him.
God, I don't remember that moment, but I don't doubt that it happened.
It's easily the best line in the movie. It's like, it's okay, guys. He only wants his machete.
Yes, that is. That whole movie is just so ridiculous. I mean, we have a cyborg, we have a machine that brings people back to life.
Yeah, we get Uber Jason later, so it is so stupid, but still fun.
All right, everyone. Well, that ends our Friday the 13th. What do you call that?
I think we're going to call it a field trip.
Ooh, I like that. Well, that ends this field trip to Friday the 13th's Camp Crystal Lake and beyond.
And it really goes beyond sometimes. So emphasis on the beyond. But we hope you enjoyed our little field trip. We want to hear what you think about the field trip. Should we keep doing them? Which ones should we do? And we'll be getting back to our regular dueling movies as well in the coming weeks.
Please tell us if you like this. Thank you so much for listening and letting us experiment a little bit with this podcast. We appreciate it. Have yourself a wonderful day or night, and you'll hear us soon.
Stay groovy.